is a science-based researcher, amateur astronomer, theologian who has found new evidence based on historical Chinese records. Let's see here. Records of planetary bodies that provide data points that he has plugged into NASA-type astronomy software that utilizes Kepler's law of planetary motion. And there's a whole bunch here. So what I'm going to do is I am going to bring him on. He says that he can pretty much prove that Planet 7X will be arriving. So we'll talk to him about that here in just a moment. All right, no calls yet, folks. Give us a few minutes. Let us get things going, and definitely no unknown numbers. You call with an unknown number, I'm probably most definitely not going to take your call. So, all right, so here we go, folks. Again, Gil, we're going to bring him on with us right about now. Good evening, Gil. This is Michael Vera with Late Night in the Midlands. How are you?
Thank you for having me, Michael.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you taking the time out, and I'm looking forward to hearing all about your discoveries and because I think you take a different, you got a little different take on all this, and that's fresh for me, and I'm looking forward to it. So, how about we start out with a little bit of background and what got you so interested in something like Planet X, and now you call it Planet 7X, right?
Right. I was trying to separate the data because my findings are different than what the average person is stating on the internet, and most of the stuff on the internet is based on circular reasoning. They don't have any actual physical data to back up what they're saying, and I approached this as a skeptic, and so that kind of put me on a different path there.
Well, and that's the best way to go about something like this, too. I think everybody comes into a lot of this stuff as a skeptic, I hope. And, look for the evidence that shows that there's some bearing to it. So I guess that's what you'll be doing tonight for us, right? So what I want, first off, be comfortable and feel free to get into any aspects of this that you like. I'm not judging. I'm not here to debate it. I'm here to learn about it. So wherever you would like to start is fine with me. I guess first get into some of your research and why you say that this is a real thing, a real phenomena. And you say it's not the 3,600-year cycle. Is that right?
That is correct. When I was doing my research, there was no hard data pointing to a 3,600-year orbit. People had stated it, but when you go back to try to look at where it is stated in a clay tablets, or what documents did they pull this from, it seems to be non-existent. So I came to the conclusion when I had spent some time in China before, and I spent about 9 months in China, and I was aware on how far their records go back. They almost go maybe 4,000 years or greater. And I said, well, if any group of people would have taken time to document this, I would think it'd been the Chinese. And so I came across, the first study I came across was it's a scientific white paper called The Reevaluation of the Eastern and Western Records of the Supernova 1054. Mm-hmm. And this is backed up also by another study which is similar, the Chinese guest star of AD 1054 and the Crab Nebula by the University of Malaysia. The first one I mentioned was from the Dublin Institute of Advanced Studies. And both of these studies point out that they were originally mistaken when they were claiming that this was a supernova in 1054 that the Chinese had documented. because the supernova happened like 2 or 3 months earlier. It was found in the records that this object is quite clear whenever you read the report. A supernova is stationary. It can only be in one constellation. And this object today, witnessed for 26 months, moved through multiple constellations. We had basically what they found now is undocumented NEO, near Earth object, of sizable size. And so when I read this, the Asian, the Chinese, the Korean, and the Japanese astronomers gave such great detail on the elevation, the location, the date, the time, the city that they were witnessed it in, all of the parameters we needed to make an attempt to plot a segment of its course. And so I made an attempt and started to plot this thing, and come to find out it matches a pre-existing model.
It does.
And that model happens to be a biblical model, because the entry and exit point was roughly 150 and 152 days apart.
So
and the exit was in the month of Passover.
I see. I was going to ask, so then where did people get the 3,600 year thing from? Because then that wouldn't be accurate. Then you say it's every 360 years, is it?
That's what it seems, because this was only in 1054 AD now. Okay, the zeros were created. Remember, cultures didn't have a zero; they were implied. Zeros were only added to the text in 976 AD, and with this document in 1054, we're not dealing with an ancient language that's several thousand years old. Okay, this is only about 960 years or so. And the Chinese characters can still be read today. And so it's not like it would be a difficult task to translate. Matter of fact, we have scientific white papers which are approved by peer review study that this is correctly translated, and it's an unknown object that was never documented before, and that's quite large to be able to view it 13 months out and 13 months leaving.
So now, have you been able to, you're an amateur astronomer, so you're the kind of guy that I like to talk to, because, everyone always says, how come amateur astronomers haven't come out and spoke out about this? Well, you are. So, have you been able to spot this thing yourself?
No, sir. No. According to the calcs, if it had been seen in a normal realm with in other words, it takes, at the time that it reaches Neptune's orbit, it takes 16 years from that point to reach the sun. And it's about twice as big as Neptune. So a decent Mr. Astronomer could have spotted it if they would have known where to look at. Now, what's interesting, though, about this is that when I reverse the model, there's a date given in Revelation 12:1 that I can't say is going to be the exact date that it's going to cross, but it greatly concerns me because of the details that it gives. But when we reverse it from that point using this Chinese model, it threads the needle between the Voyager and Pioneer probes that they sent. And you can read the articles that they were looking for Planet X. Okay, the 10th planet at the time. And this threads the needle and puts it right in the area that they were looking at. That was about 8 years out of the solar system when NASA stopped talking about it. went silent in 1992.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is also the same area on modern studies. We have two modern studies, one in England, one from the U.S., that we have dozens of comets that their orbits are being warped inside our solar system and only in one region of space. And that region of space is Sagittarius. Sagittarius is also where the Voyager and Pioneer probes were sent.
So
Sagittarius is also where this Chinese model points to.
So Sagittarius is where, when people do start seeing this, this is where they'll see it coming out of.
Well, you see, we rely only on one of our major senses, which is sight.
Right.
And that's been reliable throughout most of history, but in modern time, that may not be the one that we should be relying on the most. Because present technology, I have a bonus video that people can look at. It shows some of the laboratory tests. They can bend light around an object. It just takes lasers. And they have the ability to cloak an object. And it bends the spectrum of light, and infrared is a part of the spectrum of light. So even if you try to look for this with a infrared, if the government they had 8 years from 1992 to year 2000 when it reached the edge of the solar system to develop some way of blocking our view. Because if their number one mission is to protect financial markets, because without their markets going, they lose tax revenue, and you'd have some form of chaos.
Mm-hmm. So then the government obviously knows about this. I mean, you know, that's everybody, you know, knows that they've been building stuff underground and they've been preparing for something, right? So why not that be a Planet X type object? So where, because everyone's asking, and folks, let me just say this really quick. I'm not taking calls yet. I will take calls after the break. There's been several of you trying to call in already. It's just too early for that. You'll take us all out of context. So wait until after the break. Also, if you want to ask me a question to present to the guest, you may do so in our chat room, but you have to do it through private message. So I don't have to go chasing your questions through all the chat. So those are the two rules there. So we will take calls, but we're not doing it yet. So give us till about the 10:30 mark, and then we'll be taking some calls. So basically, this thing comes around every, say, 360 years, but most of the time it's not a problem. Most of the time we don't even realize it's anywhere in our neighborhood. But then there's that every now and then that it comes, I guess it gets a little too close and interferes. Is that what happens?
Well, Margaret, let me correct that a little bit.
Okay, please do.
Each time it does come around and it has a erratic orbit, it does not have a stationary 360, because this object is on the planetary plane of all our planets here, basically. All right, so it has a lot of interference. We also have, let me see, debris fields, where now we may have a reason, a cause and effect, a reason for why we see some of these debris fields. We have, let me see, debris fields following Jupiter, one in back of it and one in front of it, and we have Pluto, which used to be a moon of Neptune. Something bumped it and caused it into this very steep, elliptical orbit. We have the asteroid belt, which is a destroyed planet called Ceres. Something collided with it. Mars has a bruise on it where it was pushed up another 1.5 degrees out of the, it was closer to the same plane of Earth. This one anomaly of this planet can answer many of the anomalies in the universe right now. and when it comes through our solar system, it causes a few common denominators. It causes roughly a 7-year drought. You get 3.5-year drought coming in, while it has 3.5-year drought as it leaves. It causes, on some occasion, a double eclipse, and sometimes it's documented that the entire Earth is darkened. These are things that a normal eclipse cannot do. The moon produces just a small path across the Earth, and it can only last maybe 7.3 minutes. There's an eclipse documented in Yeshua's sacrifice that was 3 hours. That cannot happen in the natural. And it states a double eclipse. Both the sun and the moon is darkened. That cannot happen in the natural. Mm-hmm. It takes a third object of sizable size, about 6.5 to 7.5 times the diameter of Earth, to create 3 hours of darkness. Because remember, Yeshua was sacrificed on Passover. That's a full moon. The moon's on the wrong side of Earth to be involved with a solar eclipse. It automatically is defining a third object of sizable proportions. And you can find over 14 events in the Bible, which are eyewitness accounts that...
I was just going to ask you that, if you wouldn't mind going through some of the documented evidence of something like this, a Planet X type object, whether it be biblical text or whatever ancient text. There is evidence. Well, there's I guess I shouldn't say evidence, but there's people's accounts of this happening, right?
Well, let's define what science is. Okay. Neil Grasson had defined what science is in astronomy. When you take observed phenomena, bring it into the laboratory and show that it's repeatable, that's science. Now, whether it comes from clay tablets, papyrus, or the Bible, you can't forge the orbital mechanics and Kepler's law of planetary motion and the eclipses and the scenarios associated with this unless you had advanced knowledge, and they didn't have it. So they had to witness something, and we can prove it scientifically. We can prove now how Joshua's long day actually occurred and how Earth can literally stop without mile-high tidal waves with the new physics. Because there's two camps of thought. The astronomy model shows, the electromagnetic model, these biblical accounts are matching a model that's right on.
I see. Very, very interesting. So what else is there? I've some people have associated wormwood. I guess it's mentioned in the Bible. They've associated that with it as well.
I tend not to, because the wormwood is a description. They use terms as I think that's a large meteor that's in the debris trail, and that's going to be hitting Earth 5 months later. The first meteor shower would be in March or April, the time of Passover, and in modern times we're looking at 152 days later would be a second event. And that's where a fiery mountain would hit the Earth, which is called wormwood. And the details that they're given, it's quite extreme.
So, and one of the listeners kind of asked a question along these lines, but so how do we know that what they seen, whatever might have eclipsed the Earth or whatever might have, fire from the sky being dropped or whatever happened, how do we know that it wasn't just some huge like ship, kind of something like the Death Star, and it looked like a planet, I mean, do we know for sure that what exactly they were describing and what they were seeing?
Well, I don't get. I stick with the science base
Okay.
part of this, and the models are working. For instance, um, a spacecraft, as you were mentioning, wouldn't have a plasma tail. You
Okay.
need a plasma tail, like a comet, uh, for Earth to slow down by 12 hours and come, because Earth, in Joshua's long day, the way that the path is passing, the tail points away from the sun. It doesn't follow the path of its direction of travel, and that Earth is entering into the plasma tail uh, and losing its rotational speed at 4.5 to 5.5% hourly, compounded for the next 24 hours. And then Earth comes to a complete stop. You can only do that if you go through a plasma tail. And the electromagnetic model works. I showed this to a physics professor, and he took time to study. He said I was the first one to explain this logically. We have a logical model, and it's just using the Chinese model that we came up with out of the what they witnessed in 1054.
Are the Chinese saying anything about it these days? I mean, do you see anything? Because I don't know if they're any more apt to put these types of things out than the U.S. I'm guessing probably not. But are they talking about it? I mean, do you see anything coming out of China on this?
The
No.
only reason why we have the document that we have is because it's mislabeled as a supernova.
Ah. Well, that'll work too. Um,
So,
Okay, so then a lot of this has got is this Chinese prophecy or is this actual records of
no, literal records. The emperor had X amount of astronomers that would look every night in certain areas of the sky. They were to document if there was any comets, because just like the Mayans, just like many cultures, the archaeologists said they were preoccupied at studying the stars. Yeah, you could say that. I think it's because they were looking. When is it coming back so they can prepare food and water ahead of time?
I will say this: China went and built all these ghost cities. I don't know if I'm sure you're aware of that.
Yeah,
I don't know what they built them for, but one can only guess. I suppose.
yeah. Well, there's something else that when I was there that I noticed, and I was able to visit part of it. They were to put 60% of their population underground in their major cities. Some of their brand new malls, when you go into the lower levels, the older buildings have restaurants on the top of their buildings. The newer ones have restaurants in the basement of their building. And if you look carefully, you see that there's an inserted wall, like ready to pop out, with this rubber cushion around it that slides out, sealing the restaurant area underneath the ground. It's part of their tunneling complex, and you can even look in the. They even advertise that there's X amount of restaurants in their underground tunnels facilities that you can actually eat in, and
Well, see, I believe that because I know here in the United States, I've seen pictures from people I trust who have shown me photos of like farmland that they actually have underground. I mean, the artificial sun. I mean, there roads and you name it. I mean, there's I've been told that there's stores and everything ready to go under the ground.
see, if you take into account the Earth. See, the Bible tells us that we would see it very late during this next time for some reason, and it says that that a wicked industrial generation would have only one word warning, and I believe to take that as being Joshua's Jonah's warning of 40 days. And you can see, well, he also says you'll see the earthquakes escalate like the pain of a woman giving birth. And this has to be during the generation of Israel, when Israel was formed. Well, this has never happened before until just recently, the last 15 years or more, about the last 20 years, that the earthquakes are having exponential growth. They're outrageous. And our volcanic activity is the same, and our weather patterns, and our magnetic north is moving at 12 times its normal rate. What normally affects a magnetic field is another magnetic field. Well, like in the case of what's warping the comets.
I can't argue with that. That's a good point that you make right there.
Now, if you put into, if you ever want to find the truth, sometimes you have to follow the ink. You know how you follow a criminal, you follow the money.
Mm-hmm.
Well, sometimes they hide money pretty good, you follow the ink. Well, if we follow the ink of what the government is doing, why are they moving all the alphabet agencies to higher ground in Colorado, somewhere like that? They're moving them from the coastline. Then why is the U.S., Russia, and China both building extensively underground shelters?
And they have, I had gotten reports, I don't know, 6, 7 years ago that they were moving alphabet agencies, getting them situated in Colorado in the high grounds.
Correct. And then why are they doing practice run to put some form of martial law on the people? If you follow the ink, they're preparing for something.
They are preparing for something. And I gotta say, Planet X through the years has been one of the more controversial topics. And the reason I have continued to cover it is because when I was in high school, I was in 7th grade, and my science teacher, Mr. Friedman at John Marshall High School, so I'm not making any of this up, he passed out these little NASA magazines. They were like just little paperbacks, maybe 12, 13 pages on them. And we'd get these every week. And in these things, we would have to pick a story and do an essay on it. Well, this particular week, it was back in, I want to say it was 83, 84, but it talked about how a Russian satellite had caught a glimpse of this Planet X. And it talked about what a glorious thing it could be. There might be life. So at the time I'm thinking, oh, wonderful. I can't wait to see what develops of this. Then I never heard nothing about it no more until, I became an adult and started getting into it like I do now. But yeah, it's like it got hush hush after that.
You know what's interesting? I think there's 84 constellations, okay? Why is it that there's 4 scientific white papers and 14 biblical accounts that talks about it, and 6 secular sightings, as well as 3 missions from NASA pertaining to the Pioneer and Voyager probe, all pointing to only one constellation out of, I think, 88 total constellations in the sky. And not just anywhere in the sky, but on the ecliptic, a thin line. Because for this to have a double meteor shower, that means it crosses Earth's path twice, not once. And the other pivot point is the sun, so you got 3 fixed points. This object can only come from the ecliptic. And that's where they sent the Voyager and Pioneer probe, above and below the ecliptic, to give a triangling effect with their instruments to pinpoint where the object was. It's the odds of that. You know how vast space is?
Oh, I know. And
for them to thread a needle like that, but I'd say that's kind of high odds to be able to do that randomly.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So basically, there's no doubt. I don't think anybody could deny that they've set out looking for this thing a long time ago, and so they found it. You think if you could get into their records, that they'd probably have tons of data on this thing?
I believe so because they went silent in 1992. Before that, they stated they were looking for it. And when we reverse the model, it shows that it was 8 years out of the solar system. Pioneer and the Voyager probe was like 6 years out, and they were able to triangulate this position quite easily. They had 8 years to develop a way to block our view. And I've had senior NASA retired engineers contacted me that told me straight out, said that I connected the dots. So I had an opportunity to ask them. I said, does the government have some method of blocking our view, whether they use lasers or holograms? And he gave me one short answer. He said yes. He would not expound on how it's being done because it's secret, but they have the ability to do it. Now we have all the effects of an inbound planet. If we go and count all of the effects, the so-called global warming doesn't add up.
No, it doesn't. But let me ask you this though. I mean, geoengineering is a real phenomena. It's happening too. And so, how much of that can we equate, to the strange weather phenomena that we're having?
Well, put it this way, like you see, you heard about El Nino.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe you haven't heard about this, where they estimate that there's over 3 million undersea volcanoes. Okay, and a lot of them, there's a large amount of them that are located where the El Nino starts at. Now, if that's the most active area, and we've seen volcanic activity above ground being extremely active, what does that tell us that's going on underneath the ocean? Now, if you had a cluster of those going off underneath the ocean around that, wouldn't that warm up the ocean waters? Yes. And is it taken into account? Not yet. I haven't seen anything. And all of the planets are warming up. Last time I checked, there's no cars on Mars, so how can it be global warming with the other planets? How is it that global warming is affecting our magnetic field and it's moving 12 times its normal rate, and exactly in the direction that this object is coming from? It's being pulled in the same direction that it's coming from. Magnetic fields affect other magnetic fields, and that's what we're seeing. Opposite poles attract.
Well, yeah, and that's a great point again that you make, because that's true. I mean, the only thing that would, like you said, affect or disrupt the magnetic field would be another magnetic field. Now, does this thing? I mean, I guess the question now is like the path, the timeline. What path will it be taking? And I mean, is it going to perturb our sun? Is it perturbing our sun already?
Yes, because it's electromagnetic in nature. Yes, that's what is kind of causing these oddities in the sun that the solar scientists can't really predict anymore, because it's out of its normal range. We usually have cycles every 11 years apart or so, and it's showing strange effects. We see moons that are normally quiet that are erupting with volcanic.
I mean, if people go to your website, can they find? I mean, do you have a lot of this documented where they can go check it out?
They can actually do a Google search. The only thing, see, I can't circulate the white paper reports because they're copyrighted.
Oh, I see.
But they can look them up because I stated the name. It's the reevaluation of Eastern and Western records of the supernova of 1054, the Dublin Institute of Advanced Studies. And then there's another one, the Chinese guest star of AD 1054, and the Crab Nebula by Ho Ping Yak. YOKE, University of Mission Malaysia. And then there's a university study that talks about the comets. They did 15-year study on dozens of comets, and the orbits of comets are warped. Another comet cannot warp another comet's orbit. It takes a planetary-sized object to do that. So whenever you go back and back up the models in the astronomy software, most of the planets were on the other side of the universe. There was nothing there to bother these comets. So what is it? You know?
Yeah.
It's an unknown object. And how come we can't see it? If we have all of these effects, there's only one it's a denominator that this is pointing to, that's government interference. And according to high officials, as far as engineers go, that's who I tend to talk to, they say the government has the capability to do it. And I even have a video that shows this on laboratory experiments that they release right now. Well, whatever they release right now, they're 30 to 50 years ahead of that right now in the government realm.
And if this thing truly exists, this planet, then that would have to be what's happening, because I've often asked this with many of the people who've come on to talk about Planet X with me. I've asked them, well, you know, like I've had people come and say, well, I've got pictures and I've got this, and I'm thinking, okay, well, if you're seeing it, you're able to see it, then I should be able to see it too. And, you know, and then people who say, well, no, it's close, but you can't see it yet. And I'm thinking, once it gets close enough to disturb us in major ways, I would think that just like Jupiter and the other distant planets, the light would start hitting this thing and we'd be able to see it, right? Unless they block it.
Correct, but I mean, at what point do we draw a line and say, okay, now it's reached its limit? We're seeing earthquakes. Let me give you an actual number here.
Okay.
Give me 1 second, and I'll find it. That way, I won't be exaggerating. In other words, in 1973, annual earthquakes was 4,539. Okay. 1974, the earthquakes was 4,528. Now let's jump to 2014. 118,000 earthquakes. It's already here. It's the dramatic effects are already here.
And oh yeah, okay. So then it's got to get worse than this, right? I mean,
as it comes closer, yes, you're going to see exponential growth, and that's why I'm expecting it either this year, because from Neptune's orbit, Kepler's law of the planetary motion, with the present elliptical orbit that the Chinese data is able to give me. When we reverse the model from Neptune's orbit, it takes 16 years for it to reach the sun. And that was year 2000. 16 years is this year right here in March. Or maybe next year. We're not that far off, you know. But we have to have a sighting to confirm the data. And we're having interference from the government to where I cannot qualify this research right here, because they're blocking our view, or have the capabilities of blocking our view. Now, there are no valid sightings in the public realm at this moment. That's why you won't. There's 2 to 3 million amateur astronomers. That's why they're not speaking up, because they can't take a picture of it. It's all people with iPhones and these other cameras given, but that's sun dogs and lens flares and other, you see, anomalies that they're not familiar with.
Well,
but there is no valid sightings in the public realm at this moment. But doesn't mean we have to stay attentive and look for it. It's going to be appearing late.
And so you would expect it to be visible. I mean, are you saying it should be visible now, except they're making sure we don't see it? Or are you saying that it should be visible in the very near future with the naked eye? Or exactly, I mean, so telescopes and stuff, you're not going to have any luck seeing it right now. Will there be a time that you will, even if they try to block it?
We'll probably see it with our naked eye when it shows it. We won't need a telescope, because when they release the technology, if it's lasers or whatever they're using, then it will be, you'll see a brand new star similar to Jupiter, but as bright as Venus. It'll be as large as Jupiter in the sky, but as bright as Venus. And it won't be threatening, not until maybe the last 10 or 12 days of its approach. That's when it really gets really big, because as it cuts the distance in half, it doubles in size. So it's only in the last few days that it really gets ominous in its appearance. So what you would see would be something that looks like a large star. It won't look like the second sun, not until it gets extremely close.
And what can we expect to come from this? Now, I'm asking you this because, I mean, I've had people in the past who have, given me the script down on what will come of something like this, but they've also seen it differently than you do. So I'm really curious as to how bad it will be. I mean, these government agencies that are building under the ground, how can they be so sure that anything they build under the ground is going to withstand something like a Planet X? I don't think I'd want to be under the ground.
You see, they built basically in 3 zones: China, America, and Russia area. Okay, so 2 out of the 3 would be somewhat of a safe area, that they will think anyway. But the problem is that there's only a biblical model of the Earth slowing down by 12 hours, and that's when we go to the plasma tail. The astronomy model, which is gravity, doesn't produce the Earth slowing down by 12 hours, and they will miss the target zone by 12 hours, which is exactly the other half of the globe. Well, and the Bible talks about this. Remember, I don't have a crystal ball. I cannot tell the future. But I can point out that I cannot prove the Bible wrong scientifically. That I can tell you. And I've tried. Okay. It follows this model to a T. And it gives us more detail than what we would expect. It says this next time it comes around is the worst time in all of Earth's history. Well, if Noah's flood was not the worst, this is. Well, prepare for it. It says every wall on Earth will be cracked. It says Earth will be hit so hard that it wobble like a drunkard, like a hut in the wind. That's a view from space. How did they know that? Mm-hmm. It says every island and mountain is moved, because Earth is going to tilt 26 to 28 degrees. I have it documented 4 times in its past. And some of these are from artifacts in museum that points this out, that Earth tilted 26 to 28 degrees in the past. Hezekiah's Hezekiah's shadow going backwards. When you read the Hebrew, it's on steps. And when you point the steps south instead of east and west, you have an exact, again, a 26 to 28 degree tilt. The same thing happened to Joseph of Egypt, which is confirmed by what's called the sky disk of Nibiru. That arrangement on what's on that disk proves out the Earth tilted 26 to 28 degrees. Remember, Joseph had a dream at age 17, which would be 16 in our ages. Not until he was 40, in the mid of the drought, did the Earth tilt. And that date is reflected in the Nibiru disk on the arrangement of the star patterns. It gives us the exact year that tilt took place, which was mid of the drought of Joseph of Egypt.
And should we start to see, and I mean, at some point, I guess we would, should we start to see like little changes such as stars being out of place, or moons or suns not coming up where they normally do? I mean, is it going to be a slow kind of change, or is it going to be all of just totally sudden at some point, in your opinion?
The last, put it this way, they'd have to turn off all generators in the world the last 3 days of its approach, because they need to do it about 24 hours before entering the plasma tail, because it's just like having a solar flare. It would be very intense on the electromagnetic field of the Earth, and that would cause short outs in electrical. So you're looking at about 3 days of no generators for the world until it passes, and then they can. And then after that, we're going into the let me see, debris field behind it, which takes about 1 hour for it to pass through it. And whatever half of that Earth, which is the daylight side, that's facing the sun, is the side that's going to be hit in March. The one that's 150 days later is the nighttime side that's hit, and that would be about the end of August. And it's going to get, the Bible gives great detail that both of these events is mainly hitting North and South America.
Wow.
And
one of the listeners asked a pretty good question, I guess. He says, I don't understand why Planet X cannot be seen. He says, heck, they could see stuff out of our solar system. And he's got a good point there, but your argument is that they're making sure that nobody sees it, right? Because he may have tuned in late.
yeah, if you go to my YouTube channel on Planet 7X, and look for the bonus 2 video. At the end of there, I show laboratory experiments using lasers. They put their hand right in front of the viewer, and you can't see it because the laser is capturing the light behind it and blocking even the infrared picture of the hand. All light coming off the hand is blocked, and the light behind it is cast in front of it. It's cloaked completely. So we were depending on infrared to see this. It won't work. We were depending on our visual perspective. That won't work if they have this technology. Now, if we use our other senses on what we're calculating on the earthquakes, on all the symptoms and what we would expect on an approaching body, they're all there. The magnetic north, the volcanic activity, the earthquakes, we had
that right here in South Carolina, my friend. We had the historical floods, they called them.
That's right. And if you look back in history, that's roughly 360 years ago. When the last time they said the last time I estimate the last 2 times that it passed, that was during. We have a painting that points out that it possibly passed not near Earth. Now remember. It's only when it passes near Earth that it's very severe. But it passed 1697, and before that it passed in 1456. And this wood carving, the people in the carving is pointing to an object that's slightly larger than the sun, and they're pointing at this new object. And it looks like there's lightning of it. I just recently found one of the things that bothered me. I said, okay, if this planet did pass as close as this, that caused Earth to tilt, then we should have a plasma crater, a plasma discharge crater. We see them on Venus, we see them on the Moon, we see them on Mars, and also Mercury. Those are planets that it passed near. So where is it on Earth? Well, we found it, one of them. In the Sahara, that's called the Eye of the Sahara, there's a 25 to 30 mile plasma discharge crater. It's a flat crater. And it's circular in multiple circles, rings in the center. And this is where a lightning bolt, 25 to 30 miles hit. When 2 planets get very close together, there's a discharge of plasma between the 2. And we have a crater, which is a concave crater, is a meteor But a flat crater like this with multiple rings is a plasma discharge crater.
So that would be a thunderstorm, like, or a lightning storm, like you'd never see again, huh?
Remember the Greeks and their mythological story about Zeus, where he cast lightning bolts and would melt mountains?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But there's a thread of truth to that. This is what they called Zeus. This is what the Egyptians called Horus. This is what the ancient Canaanites called Baal. Most of these pagan gods were pointing to this object right here. And Zeus, the story about Zeus is where he threw lightning bolts and melted a mountain. Well, in the Sahara there, it hits a mountain right there. It dissolves 600 feet of it in depth. Or no, 300 and something feet is in depth. There's a thread of truth to that. But it's the way they described it with the limited language. They didn't have words for meteors. They didn't have words for planets. They called them luminary objects. They didn't have the zero. They didn't have. There's quite a few things you have to compensate for ancient languages. And you have to have a basis to look back at what they're talking about. The basis for this came from the Chinese records. We have a real object that came through in 1054. It was clearly documented by 3 different civilizations: the Chinese, the Korean, and the Japanese. And it was seen for 26 months. You can't see a comet for 26 months, not unless you have a telescope. These people didn't have a telescope. They're using their natural vision to see this. That had to be a very large object.
Oh, yeah, absolutely it would have to be. Gil, hang on with us for a moment. We've got to take a break when we come aboard, Barry.
Hey, how you doing, Michael?
Good. How are you?
Good, thanks. Gil, I just want to ask a real quick question, and I'll be out of your hair here. Is this the one that passed by once before and went around to the backside of the sun?
It always passes behind it. All of the objects will pass around the sun as it's exiting.
Well, just recently, there was. It's like it orbits. It has its own orbit. Well, they call it a. What would you call it? It has its own orbit. Actually, it doesn't orbit with us. It orbits in a different. It has a different orbit. And this was, from what I understood, it had passed by, went around the sun. It was supposed to be coming back through, but I'm not sure if the rumor is that they were supposed to have blown it up or something. I don't know.
I'm not aware of it, so I can't really comment on. I'm sorry.
All right, no problem. I wasn't sure if this is the one that they talked about it passing by before or not.
No, I can tell you for sure that this object has not been sighted yet. Okay.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Michael.
Well, thank you, Barry. I appreciate the call.
Hey, no problem. Thank you.
All right. Good night. All right. So, and folks, again, lines open. Everybody was calling like crazy before, so, but I wasn't taking calls yet. Now I am. So you're welcome to call in 803-392-4566. You can also get us on Skype. Our Skype ID is LNM Radio. It's that simple. All right. So, let's get back to it. And, Gil, while we're waiting for calls, there's plenty to talk about in this regard as far as Planet X goes. Where would you like to take us next on this? I mean, how about maybe get into some of the events that are happening now? I mean, even within government, what are certain things that people can keep an eye on to get an idea of the progression and how close things are coming?
Well, the Bible is predicting a double meteor shower, which is first meteor shower CO6, second meteor shower CO7. Before 6 can happen, you have to have CO3, 4, and 5 occur. CO3 is economic collapse. We may be seeing that in our markets here. I'm not quite sure yet, but it's taking a pretty bad dip here. And then after that is war, possibly pertaining a greater war in the Middle East, and that talks about famine, and pestilences, plural.
Uh-huh.
Then there's a section in there, I'm not quite sure if it's interpreted correctly. It says a quarter of the world population dies of the globe. I think that might be a quarter of the world population is the threat of death. In other words, if we had terrorists threatening the Western nation, that's roughly about a quarter of the world population under the threat of death, I think. That could be defining the future terrorism coming up. And then the CO5 is a peace agreement. It's referring to, and Israel will have to give up part of the West Bank, and Israel is forced to give it up for the other nations of the world to have peace from terrorism. So we have to see these three events happen before this object comes around. So those are the whole. You see, if we have a war or terrorism, it's going to give them the reason to put martial law or some sort of major control over the people. And an economic collapse would do a bail-in to where they control the money. So you have money control, you have food rationing, and you have fuel rationing. So you have total control over the people if you control those three elements. And the internet will probably go down during this Middle East war. They have a cyber attack. That's one way of keeping 2 to 3 million amateur astronomers silent. Because when this thing gets close, you have detailed pictures of it, having confirmation.
But I don't know as though anybody would believe anything they've seen on the internet when it comes to this nowadays. Honestly, I mean, it's even with like UFO stuff. I mean, it doesn't matter what you show people. Like, nah, that's Photoshop. That's Photoshopped.
Well, the way to do this is to have 3 to 4 amateur astronomers confirm each other's work with similar pictures. And it's going to look, each astronomer is going to have a little bit different focus on his lens. It's going to be a little bit further away, a little bit closer. But it's going to show the same pattern of craters and features. That's how you're going to know. When you see 3 to 4 amateur astronomers giving you information that's matching, start looking up. And you better check it out with your own eye. You better see it in the sky. This is not going to be taken in a great, at the edge of our solar system. It's way past that. The signs that we're seeing around us says that this object is closer. And it's, my scientific estimates brings it, originally gave it from year 2012 to 2021 is the scientific type of estimate that it should come around somewhere within that area. The biblical narrows it down to either 2016 or 17, possibly being a strong candidate. Remember, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't say absolute positively that those are the dates. I can't do that. I can only give you estimates, and that's what I've been giving is estimates. And when you're talking about a inbound planet, if you can get it within 10 years of its growth, you're doing good. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
We've had fireballs hit the planet that they claim they couldn't see.
The Bible actually gives it to the hour, which that was given over 2,000 years ago. When it got that accurate, that date greatly concerns me. And that date is March 26th of this next March. What will happen on that day, I don't know. But the way that they gave it is, it's like 2,000 years ago, looking at the midnight skies during Passover, it had been Libra, the scales of judgment. Today, it's the woman, which is Virgo. And it says the moon at her foot. Well, the moon at her foot, the moon has a tilted orbit. It only comes around every 18 years, that tilt, for it to be at her foot. And then it says a crown of 12 stars. Well, Leo is 11. The 12th star is Jupiter. Well, Jupiter has an orbit of 11 point something years, 11.75. You needed at least 4 decimal places on these items to get that correct. And this is the viewpoint from Jerusalem at midnight after a 12-hour delay in Earth's rotation. And that's to the hour. And that's what it shows up. We'll have to see if that has any merit, you know. I can only give estimates. But it greatly concerns me. I'll put it to you like all the other math challenges in the model, it passes with flying colors in the Bible. They could not have made this up.